$10 million. That's what they thought it would take to buy J.D. Vance's silence. One midnight meeting, one envelope on the table, one request, pull back on the China bill. Quietly, no speeches, no headlines. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask who sent them. He just pushed the envelope back across the table and said, "No." That single word lit the fuse. Within 48 hours, the smear campaign began. Fabricated leaks, headlines on loop, death threats in the inbox. Friends turned quiet. Enemies turned loud. And the American public was left wondering, was he the villain or the warning? This is the story of what happens when a man refuses to be bought. A story of power, betrayal, and the high price of integrity in a world that often sells it cheap. And though the details have been dramatized, names reimagined, and moments shaped for storytelling, what you're about to see is not about perfect accuracy, it's about emotional truth. Because sometimes fiction is the only way to tell the stories we feel, but cannot verify. The whispers behind closed doors, the pressure that never makes headlines, the price paid in silence. This isn't a statement of fact, it's a reflection of something deeper. What it means to stand alone and still stand anyway. So ask yourself, if they came after your name, what would you do? Stay with us. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. It was 5 minutes past midnight when J.D. Vance stepped into the Monocle, the kind of Washington, D.C. restaurant where secrets age better than wine. The last table near the back had already been cleared. A single booth remained dimly lit, its walls curved high enough to keep voices trapped like whispers in a bottle. He scanned the room. The maitre d' gave him a quiet nod. No words, no menu. Just confirmation. They were expecting him. Across the booth sat a man in a pinstripe suit, crisp white shirt, cufflinks that caught the candlelight, and a face J.D. couldn't quite place, but one that looked familiar in the way that power often does. The man didn't stand. He simply gestured to the seat across from him with 2 fingers, slow and deliberate, like someone used to giving orders without sound. J.D. sat, no handshake. Between them, untouched, a small glass of bourbon, a folded linen napkin, and an envelope thick and sealed in wax. The man leaned in, voice low, as if discussing wine preferences. "You're underfunded. The opposition's pulling ahead. Ohio media's circling." He tapped the envelope twice. "We think you shouldn't have to fight alone." J.D.'s eyes didn't move. He didn't touch the envelope. "Who's we?" The man smiled, like a chess player seeing 2 moves ahead. "Just people who understand stability and respect silence." That was the first moment J.D. felt it. Not fear, not yet. That slow, thick sensation that the air around you is heavier than it should be. Like stepping into a room right after someone whispered your name. J.D. shifted in his seat, not out of discomfort, but control. "And the condition?" The man didn't blink. "There's a trade bill, one that names certain trade practices in the Pacific, too directly, too politically. Let's say the language could soften or disappear." The silence stretched. A waiter passed quietly behind them, careful not to look. "In D.C., you learn not to make eye contact with deals." J.D. stared at the envelope. He knew what it was. $10 million in campaign support, enough to triple his ad reach. Silence, Ohio's talk radio, reframed the narrative overnight. He thought of the last poll, 9 points behind. He thought of the bill, one he drafted by hand. Language targeting tech surveillance and covert state subsidies. He thought of who would benefit if it disappeared. "That bill protects American job," J.D. said flatly. "That bill complicates delicate partnerships," the man replied almost kindly. J.D.'s hands didn't move. He looked straight at him, eyes sharp but voice even. "You brought this to the wrong table." The man's smile didn't fade. He pushed the envelope forward another inch. "You'd be surprised how many said that, before reconsidering." That's when J.D. flinched, not in fear, but disgust. He picked up the envelope, turned it over once, twice, then slowly placed it back down. Firm, decisive. "You think I'm afraid of losing?" He leaned forward now, matching the man's calm with steel. Try facing yourself after selling out your country. The lobbyist exhaled softly. He didn't argue. He simply stood, adjusted his sleeve, and left. Not hurriedly, but with the unspoken confidence of someone who didn't need to win today. JD sat there alone. The bourbon remained untouched. Outside, the wind howled through Constitution Avenue like it was carrying secrets. He didn't know it yet, but someone had already started leaking the story he never accepted. The envelope sat between them like a loaded weapon no one wanted to touch. JD didn't blink. "You brought this to the wrong man." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift in his seat, but his tone cut through the air like a chisel to glass. Every word landed sharp, cold, final. Across the table, the man's smile faltered for just a second, barely enough for the average person to notice. But JD caught it. That twitch in the eyes, that slight pull at the corner of the mouth, the flicker of recognition that maybe, just maybe, this one wasn't going to play the game. The lobbyist leaned back, folding his hands over the table like a man preparing for a second offer, one not written on paper. "Careers," he said, his voice now slower, "are made or ended by what gets said and what doesn't." The candlelight caught the edge of his cufflink again. It sparkled like a blade under moonlight. "Sometimes, Senator, silence is the highest form of loyalty, and loyalty, well," he glanced at the envelope, "it's rarely free." JD exhaled, slow and controlled. His jaw was tight now, but his voice didn't waver. "What you're calling loyalty, I call surrender." He pushed the envelope, this time with 2 fingers, back across the linen like a dead thing being returned to the earth. "Take your silence. Sell it somewhere else." For a moment, there was only the low clink of a dish being cleared at a nearby table. The waiter didn't look their way. He knew better. The man didn't move, just tilted his head, studying JD the way a hunter might study a deer that stepped the wrong way. "You think you're standing on principle," he said quietly, "but you're standing alone, and alone doesn't last long in this town." JD stood. He didn't argue, didn't threaten, just adjusted his coat, placed a $100 bill on the table, unrelated to the drink he never touched, and turned to leave. As he walked past the table, the man spoke again, this time not softly, not threatening, but with something colder. Certainty. "We won't need to touch you, Senator. We'll just change the way people see you." JD paused for just a breath, then kept walking. By the time he stepped back out onto the pavement, the wind had picked up. It whipped past the Capitol dome in the distance and curled down East Street like it had somewhere urgent to go. JD pulled his collar up and started walking toward nothing in particular, just movement, just air, just time to process. Inside the monocle, the envelope still sat in the center of the table, unopened, untouched, and already more dangerous than anything it might have contained. But JD didn't look back. He didn't need to. Something in his gut told him. The real price wasn't in the envelope. It was already being calculated, in newsroom whispers, in closed-door meetings, in the invisible hands that could turn headlines into weapons. He didn't flinch in that booth. But now, as he stepped into the dark chill of D.C. at 12:47 a.m., even he couldn't deny the question rising inside him. What exactly had he just said no to? By 8:17 a.m., the morning after the monocle, J.D. Vance was back in the Senate office, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, a black coffee steaming on the corner of his desk. The envelope never left the restaurant, but the weight of it had followed him like a second shadow. The door clicked open. Anna, his 26-year-old aide with a legal brain and a journalist's instinct, stepped inside without the usual knock. "Sir, we need to talk." Her voice was low, not urgent, but careful, like someone lowering a glass onto a table already cracked. JD didn't look up right away. He was staring at a grainy article on his screen, buried 3 links deep into a niche blog that no voter would ever read. Title: Is J.D. Vance the new face of foreign-backed America First hypocrisy? The photo they used was 2 years old, his eyes half closed, an expression that could be read as smug or sleepy, depending on how much you wanted to hate him. He clicked it closed and turned to her. "What's wrong?" Anna hesitated, then closed the door behind her softly. That told him everything. I know you don't like drama, but something's off. There's chatter on the hill. JD raised an eyebrow. There's always chatter on the hill. Not like this, she replied. Not this quiet. She held out her phone. Encrypted messages from a friend inside another Senate office. Phrases like, he stepped on something big, and there's movement in the lobbying circles, sudden, fast. JD read in silence. They don't just walk away, Anna said finally. Not after an offer like that. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, but his eyes no longer still. You think I should be looking over my shoulder? Anna didn't blink. I think they've already stepped behind you. The words hung there for a moment. JD gave a soft exhale, more out of reflection than worry. You know what the most dangerous part of this town is? He asked. She waited. It's not the people shouting at you on the news, it's the ones who never raise their voice. Anna nodded but didn't move. Sir, I'm serious. They've taken others down with less. You turning them down in person? That's not a refusal. That's an insult. JD offered a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Then I guess I better start insulting smarter. Anna started to respond, but he waved her off gently, signaling the conversation was over. She hesitated, then left. The office door clicked shut. JD sat still for a moment, then stood. He crossed to the inner door of his workspace, the one that hadn't been locked in weeks, and turned the bolt until it clicked. It wasn't about security. Not really. It was about control, about choosing the sound your world makes when it closes around you. He stood there a moment longer, one hand still on the lock. Then he turned back, eyes settling on the stack of folders on his desk. One of them held the revised language for the Pacific trade sanctions, the very bill they'd tried to make disappear. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Outside, the hallway buzzed faintly with footsteps, voices, the white noise of democracy in motion. But behind that door, the locked one, J.D. Vance sat alone with a new understanding. He hadn't walked away from a deal. He'd walked into something far bigger than a deal. The first headline hit at 6:42 a.m., not from a major outlet, not from any source J.D.'s team had on their media radar. Just a fringe blog with a loud title and a habit of throwing mud until something stuck. Breaking J.D. Vance, linked to suspicious foreign transfer. $4.6 million traced to offshore account. It shouldn't have mattered, but in Washington, lies don't need legs, just traction. By 7:12 a.m., the headline had made it to a click-hungry news aggregator. By 8 a.m., it was in a D.C. group chat full of reporters who hated being scooped, regardless of accuracy. And by 9:03, it was on cable news. Not as fact, but as a developing story we're monitoring. JD was still reviewing his morning security brief when his communications director, Carla, burst in. It's everywhere. JD looked up, blinking once. What is? Carla didn't sit. She dropped a tablet on the desk in front of him. A dozen headlines glared back. J.D. Vance faces foreign funding questions. Unverified transfer raises eyebrows ahead of trade bill vote. Money politics in silence. Is there a connection? Jesus, J.D. muttered. They're running with it like it's real. Nobody called for comment. Nobody verified a thing. Some even cropped your statement from last week to make it look like a response. He skimmed the lead paragraphs. No direct accusations, just careful phrasing, the kind designed to suggest without ever stating. Sources say, according to emerging reports, financial data believed to show. JD leaned back, eyes narrowed. What account are they even talking about? Carla shook her head. It's an offshore fund registered to a dummy LLC in Singapore. No link to you, no paper trail, but someone submitted a whistleblower tip anonymously, and someone else leaked it. Leaked it to who? She gave him a look. The kind that said, to whoever was hungry enough to print it. The door opened again. Anna entered, clutching a file. We ran a search through every donor database, back to your state race. There's nothing, no names match. But the blogs claiming exclusive access to internal filings. JD didn't move. He was staring at the headline on the screen. Senator silent amid foreign fund scandal. He exhaled through his nose. Not in anger, not in shock, in recognition. They were doing exactly what the man at the monocle had promised. We won't need to touch you, Senator. We'll just change the way people see you. Get ahead of it, he said calmly. Statement by noon. Nothing defensive, just facts. Facts won't outrun this, Carla replied. They already made it truth by printing it first. J.D. stood. Then let's make the truth louder. But even as he said it, part of him knew the truth didn't always win. Outside his office window, the Capitol lawn gleamed under morning sunlight. Clean, ordered, peaceful. Inside, chaos churned. The headlines were multiplying. Calls from donors had already begun. Cable segments queued with flashing red banners. No criminal charge. No evidence. Just doubt. Skillfully planted, rapidly growing. J.D. turned away from the window. He'd seen storms before, but this one had been engineered. By the time J.D.'s official statement went live, the damage was already calcifying. The words were sharp, measured, precise. I have never accepted foreign money in any campaign, nor have I had ties, direct or indirect, to offshore financial accounts. This accusation is baseless. I will not be silenced by manufactured scandal. But no one quoted the full statement. They lifted the most skeptical phrases and paired them with dramatic B-roll. J.D. pacing the Senate floor. J.D. stepping into a black SUV. J.D. in sunglasses, head slightly turned, as if hiding. By noon, GOP leaders had begun offering comments. Not defenses, just distance. We take these kinds of reports seriously. If the senator has nothing to hide, I'm sure it'll clear itself up. Let's let the process play out. Each one was a knife dipped in courtesy. At 2:35 p.m., J.D. made his first call to Richard Mallon, a steel magnate who'd backed him since his Ohio launch. Mallon had once said J.D. reminded him of what a Marine would sound like if you gave him a law degree and a working-class memory. It rang. Once. Twice. Voicemail. J.D. didn't leave a message. He tried another. Eva Monroe, one of his earliest bundlers. She always picked up on the first ring. Always said, J.D., what kind of trouble are you walking into now? It rang, and rang, and rang. Nothing. He stared at the call screen for a moment, then tapped end. Outside his office, his staff moved like a team in triage. Phones rang, tabs opened, faces tight. Inside, J.D. stood still. He knew this rhythm, not from politics, but from his childhood. When people didn't want to be seen next to someone in trouble, they didn't shout, they just faded, like steam off a cup no one touched. That night at home, the silence followed him. The headlines had begun mutating. A former lobbyist on a late-night panel referred to J.D.'s pattern of evasive financial behavior. A strategist from a think tank he once keynoted said, "We expected better transparency from someone in his position." They didn't even need evidence anymore. Just tone. He walked into the kitchen. Usha stood by the stove, a half-cooked meal forgotten in a pan. The room was warm, but her arms were crossed. She didn't say hello. You called Eva, she said. J.D. nodded, poured himself water, though he wasn't thirsty. She didn't answer. Usha tilted her head. And that surprised you? He didn't reply. This isn't about politics anymore, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was matter of fact, unflinching. It's about whether you disappear. He turned to face her. I won't. It doesn't matter if you won't, she said. They're not trying to stop you. They're trying to unwrite you, make you not exist in the conversation. She stepped closer, gently removed the glass from his hand. If this goes the way it's heading, you won't even get to be the villain in the story. You'll be the blank space where someone used to be. J.D. stood in the quiet hum of the kitchen. The campaign, the bill, the lobbyist. It all suddenly felt distant, like something happening in another room he was watching through a window. He wasn't being attacked. He was being erased. By the end of the week, the story had evolved beyond J.D. Vance. It had become a symbol of corruption, of secrecy, of betrayal, or so the hashtags claimed. Hashtag VanceGate was trending in all 50 states by Friday afternoon. Not just on Twitter, but bleeding into every corner of the digital bloodstream. TikTok edits, splicing JD's campaign ads with dramatic courtroom music, Instagram posts with red font captions, 10 million reasons to stay silent, Reddit threads mapping JD's known associates with arrows and grainy screenshots like a true crime board. Cable news didn't report the facts. They reported the reactions to the reactions. Alarming, if true, one anchor said, brows furrowed, voice measured. Concerning, if verified, said another. Unconfirmed, but not unbelievable, added a third. And with each careful phrase, more viewers nodded in quiet conclusion. Where there's smoke, there must be fire. The threats started soon after. Emails, anonymous calls. A handwritten note slid under the district office door. Traitors don't deserve trials. Outside JD's next town hall, protesters had gathered before sunrise. Signs waved in the cold morning wind. Vance sold us out. Who's your real boss? $10 million isn't patriotism. A woman with her daughter screamed at JD's car as it pulled up. She held a cardboard sign that read, "My son fought for this country. You sold it." Inside, the room was tense. Not angry, yet, but on edge. Loyal supporters now carried arms crossed over chests instead of campaign buttons on collars. No one clapped when JD entered. No one stood. He walked to the microphone and scanned the crowd. They weren't hostile, but they were waiting. Waiting to see if he'd blink. Waiting to know if the man they voted for still existed under the smoke. JD didn't have a teleprompter. He didn't need one. "Let me speak plainly," he said. "There's a lie moving faster than truth ever could, and some of you are wondering if it's worth believing. I get it. I do." He paused. Let the silence settle. "But hear me now. I'm not for sale, and I'm not afraid." Someone coughed. Another shuffled their feet, but there were no cheers, just the stillness of people uncertain if conviction could still mean something. If they can fake a story to take down a senator, imagine what they can do to someone without a microphone. He didn't stay long after. No handshakes, no photos, just a quiet exit through a side door where his car waited, engine running, a plainclothes officer at the wheel. Inside, Anna handed him a folder. "Threat log. We're up to 17 now." JD flipped through the printouts, tweets, emails, a voicemail transcript with the line, "If you love China so much, go live there." He closed the folder. "This was never about China," he said. Anna nodded. "It's about what you said no to." The car turned east onto the freeway, headlights cutting through a rain-slick road. JD watched the reflection of his face in the window, blurred, shadowed, almost like a man disappearing in real time. But somewhere beneath it all, the fire hadn't dimmed. They wanted him to fold, to break, to vanish. Instead, he just stepped into the storm. The next morning, the sky over DC was a steel gray mirror, reflecting no light, only weight. JD sat in his Senate office, reviewing talking points for yet another damage control interview, when there was a knock, not sharp or hurried, hesitant, two soft taps, like the door itself wasn't sure whether it should open. David pushed his head in, 23, nervous. Hair always one gust away from chaos, one of JD's junior staffers, mostly on research and document prep. He wasn't the type to interrupt anything, let alone a crisis. JD looked up. "What is it?" David stepped inside, gripping a manila folder so tightly the edges were curling beneath his fingers. I need to show you something. It's off the record. It didn't come through official channels." JD narrowed his eyes. "Then why do you have it?" David swallowed hard. "Because I made a copy before they could delete it." That made JD sit up straighter. "Close the door." David obeyed. He crossed the room, hands trembling, and placed the folder on JD's desk like it might explode. Then he stepped back. JD opened it slowly. Inside was a printed transcript, clean, formatted, time-stamped. The heading read, "Internal Client Call, Eastbrook Strategies, March 2nd. Private JD began reading, "If we can't block the bill, we neutralize the senator. He won't take funding, But he doesn't have to. All we need is one leak. Singapore routing works. Plant it, let it spread. The press will carry it. JD's eyes froze on that line. He kept reading, jaw slowly tightening. Frame it as financial hypocrisy. Ohio won't care about nuance. Push patriotism. Make him the traitor. If he fights back, by then, he's already losing. JD lowered the paper. For a long moment, he said nothing. His face was pale, not from fear, but from recognition. This hadn't been a reaction to his refusal. This had been a setup, planned in advance. The envelope at the monocle hadn't been an offer. It had been the final courtesy before war. Where did this come from? JD asked quietly. David looked like he was debating whether to answer. I interned for a guy who contracts with Eastbrook. He CC'd the wrong internal folder when saving call logs to their cloud. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. And then it was gone, erased. But I already had a copy. JD stared at him. The kid was sweating. You understand what you've just done? Yeah, David said, barely breathing. But I also understand what they're doing. JD sat back, the transcript still in hand. It all clicked. The timeline, the anonymous blog, the offshore account, the radio silence from former allies, the whispers about optics, the precision of the destruction. It wasn't improvised, it was engineered. He stood slowly, moved to the window. Outside, the Capitol gleamed under cloud cover. But inside, something new was beginning to burn. Not panic, not even outrage. Clarity. He turned back to David. You didn't bring this to the press? No, sir, just you. JD nodded once. Good. You did the hard part. Now it's my turn. David looked relieved, but not entirely. They're going to come after me, aren't they? JD gave a tired smile. If they're smart, they already are. By that afternoon, JD's war room had transformed from a quiet office into something closer to a forensic lab. Stacks of campaign records, names, firms, emails, lobbying disclosures, all cross-referenced on 3 monitors by Carla, his chief of staff, whose calm demeanor hadn't cracked since day 1 of the scandal, but whose eyes now moved with surgical focus. JD hovered behind her shoulder, arms crossed, watching as she moved from database to database, linking the transcript David brought with known lobbying activity. Let's start here, she said, pointing to a disclosure form from 6 months ago. Eastbrook Strategies, they list a foreign advisory retainer filed under a Delaware shell. She clicked. That LLC received a $3.2 million inbound from an organization called the Pacific Stability Foundation. JD's brows furrowed. That's not a domestic group. Nope, Carla said. Registered in the Cayman Islands, but with a stated mission to promote peaceful global trade alignment. Guess where they get 87% of their funding? JD didn't need to guess. Beijing, Carla nodded. Technically, it's funneled through a Hong Kong holding company, but it all tracks back to the same state-linked entity that's been trying to buy silence around Pacific sanctions. She pulled up another screen. This gets worse. She tapped a list of contributors, firms, advisors, names, some familiar, some forgettable, and then there they were, 3 names in particular, all marked in JD's memory. One had served as a campaign strategist for his primary run. Another had once ghostwritten op-eds for JD in national publications. And the third, JD stared at it for a moment, was a former senator turned policy consultant who had once taken JD aside and warned, "Don't punch the dragon unless you're ready to burn." He leaned in closer. They were building this from the inside. Carla didn't reply. She just turned to face him. This wasn't just about discrediting you. It was layered. The envelope wasn't a test. It was a formality. They already had the plan in motion before you sat down. JD said nothing. His face had shifted again. Not panic, not even anger. Focus. He stepped back from the screen and paced. So this is what it looks like, he murmured. This is how they erase you, through people who once clapped for you on stage. Carla spoke again, quieter now. They thought you wouldn't trace it. Thought you'd spend so much time defending yourself, you'd never go digging? JD turned. They were wrong. He moved to the window, hand on his hip, mind racing. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was an operation, a calibrated hit, silent, sophisticated, executed through whispers, contracts, and plausible deniability. Outside, the streets bustled with routine indifference. Inside, a war was unfolding with no smoke, no explosions, just signatures and silence. "We take this public?" Carla asked. JD shook his head. "Not yet. If we go too early, they'll bury it under denials and press statements. We need names. We need proof that can't be spun." He looked back at the screen. "We need to know how far this goes." Carla nodded and resumed her search. JD stood behind her, arms folded again, but this time not in retreat. This time, in strategy, because now he wasn't just defending himself. He was preparing to fight back. The deeper Carla dug, the clearer the picture became. Names turned into threads, threads into patterns. And then, one thread caught fire. Eric Kelton, Strategic Communications Advisor, formerly attached to JD's Senate campaign during the early stages, before he was let go after a disagreement over messaging. Smart, slick, always pushing for softer language on China, even when the base didn't want nuance. JD had trusted him once, not with everything, but enough to regret it. Now Kelton's name appeared again, tied to Eastbrook Strategies, on payroll through a third-party firm, billed under Strategic Alignment Consulting. But most damning of all, his name was on an email that referenced Vance asset suppression, dated 2 weeks before the envelope, at the monocle. JD stared at the screen. "I want him found," he told Carla. "Not background checked, found, in person." As it turned out, he didn't have to look far. 3 days later, Kelton was speaking on a panel about digital crisis management in a polarized media landscape at the Jefferson Policy Forum, barely 6 blocks from JD's Senate office. JD didn't call ahead. He didn't send staff. He went alone. The lobby of the Hilton buzzed with a low hum of think tankers, corporate sponsors, and policy influencers. JD bypassed the welcome desk, eyes fixed on the hallway just outside the ballroom. He didn't wait long. Kelton stepped out with a lanyard around his neck and a half-finished bottle of water in his hand. He looked leaner, more polished, his suit fitted to the inch, hair back in a tight professional sweep. He didn't see JD until it was too late. JD blocked his path, hands in his pockets, voice calm. "Was it always the plan?" Kelton paused mid-step, blinked once, then smiled. Not surprised, not even defensive. "You look tired, JD. You should have taken the deal." JD didn't blink. "You sat in my war room. You looked my staff in the eye." Kelton chuckled. "You thought this was still about you? You said no to the wrong people. I just made sure that decision had consequences." JD took a slow step forward. People passed around them but didn't stop. That's how DC worked. 2 men exchanging words that meant war, and no one noticed. They paid you to fabricate foreign money, to leak fake records, to make a senator look like a criminal. Kelton's voice dropped, colder now. "They didn't pay me to lie. They paid me to win. And in this town, that's not the same thing." JD looked him dead in the eye. "You sold your country." Kelton leaned in slightly, his breath quiet and sharp. "No, I sold a moment. The country was never on the table." He stepped past JD, brushing his shoulder without apology. Down the hall, back to the ballroom, to the panel, to the applause. JD didn't follow. He stood there still, not shaken, not even furious, just clear. This wasn't about bad press anymore. It wasn't about rumors or media storms. It was about the rot inside the room. People who once wore his colors, now sharpening their knives for the highest bidder. He pulled out his phone and texted Carla. "Confirm all internal security, no loose access. Starting today, we assume nothing is private." She replied instantly, "On it." JD slipped the phone back in his pocket, stepped out of the hotel, and into the cold sunlight. They thought they could erase him. They forgot one thing. He was still breathing. The community center in Akron hadn't changed much since JD last stood there. Same faded flags along the back wall, same creaky folding chairs, same smell of burned coffee and floor wax. But something in the air was different now. Denser, less forgiving, The room was full, but not full of warmth. No signs, no campaign shirts, just crossed arms, lowered brows, eyes that used to sparkle with hope, now clouded with suspicion. JD stood behind the mic, notes in his hand that he never looked at. He didn't need prepared lines anymore. Nothing he said would sound scripted enough or sincere enough for a crowd that had already started bracing to be disappointed. "I know what's being said," he began. "I know some of you think I took money, that I'm in someone's pocket, that I turned my back." A voice cut through from the middle row. Male, loud, tired. "You didn't turn your back. You're selling us out while pretending to save us." A few others murmured in agreement. Not a chant. Not yet. But the spark had found oxygen. JD tried to keep his voice steady. "That's not true. I turned down." "Then show us the proof," a woman shouted from the right side. "You want us to trust you? Trust don't come easy when people are losing jobs and you're on TV dodging questions." JD tightened his grip on the lectern. "You think this is dodging?" he said, his voice rising a half step. "You think I wanted any of this? You have no idea what I turned down for you." The room went still. His voice had cracked, not from volume, but from something more fragile, something unpolished. Real. $10 million, he continued, quieter now. "That's what they offered me, to walk away from a trade bill that would have protected the very steel jobs we're losing right now. $10 million to stay quiet, to look the other way while Beijing buys out the future. I said no." He looked across the crowd. He saw doubt, hurt, and worse, the growing distance between them. Then they came for me, not with bullets, with headlines, hashtags, whispers. They didn't want to debate me. They wanted to delete me. He paused again. "And now the people I stood up for think I'm the enemy." No one shouted back this time. Instead, a man in the front row, gray beard, factory patch on his chest, spoke in a low voice. "It's hard to tell the difference, JD. Everyone says they're fighting for us. Every one of them." JD nodded slowly. His anger softened, but not his conviction. "I know, and maybe I haven't earned your trust back. Not yet. But I didn't come here to win you back tonight. I came to say this in person. I didn't take a damn dime, and I'll prove it." He stepped back from the mic. No applause followed, no boos either. Just silence, uncertain, unsettled. And somewhere in that silence, JD knew the battle wasn't just with enemies in suits or consultants with clean smiles. It was with memory, with faith, with people too exhausted to hope one more time. As he left the stage, a child reached out for his hand. JD paused, squeezed it gently. Outside, the wind picked up across the parking lot. JD pulled his coat tighter, not against the cold, against the weight of knowing the hardest war wasn't in Washington. It was right here, in the room he used to call home. The town hall lingered in JD's mind long after he left Akron. Not the shouting, not even the silence, but the way the people had looked at him, not like a leader, not like a liar, like a question they were too tired to keep asking. He didn't sleep that night. He tried, but his body refused to settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the crowd. Arms crossed, brows furrowed, hope retreating behind suspicion. Around 2 a.m., he gave up trying, made coffee, opened his inbox, scanned the threats, deleted them, scanned the support messages, deleted those too. None of it felt real. Then he saw it, not an email, a physical envelope, unmarked, no return address. His staff had left it on his desk, assuming it was routine correspondence. It wasn't. Inside, on plain ruled paper, in slanted, jagged handwriting that looked forged in tension, was a single paragraph. "I'm a Vietnam vet. I don't tweet. I don't protest. But I know what betrayal looks like. If it's true, if you took their money, you're worse than the enemy I fought in the jungle. But if it's not, and they're doing this to you, then you better stand like hell. Because if you fall, so do the rest of us." It wasn't signed, just dated, 3 days ago. JD sat with the letter in his lap for nearly 20 minutes. No blinking, no movement, just silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, it feels loud. He thought about the envelope, the real one, the one that never left the table at the monocle. He could still see it, thick, wax-sealed, unassuming, the price of everything in a single fold of paper. He replayed it in his mind again, this time slower, the man's calm voice, his cufflinks, the bourbon he never drank, the phrase that never left him. Careers are made or ended by what gets said and what doesn't. And then Kelton, that smug smile outside the think tank. The words JD couldn't shake. You said no to the wrong people? He leaned back in his chair, the vet's letter still in his hand. This wasn't a press cycle anymore. This was war, not the kind with bombs or ballots, but with perception, with shadows, with people who never wanted to defeat him publicly. They wanted to erase him privately. He looked out the window. The Capitol dome stood lit in the distance, glowing like a target that never moved. The veteran's words burned in his chest. If it's not true, you better stand like hell. He whispered the last part to himself, not like a command, like a promise. He stood, walked to the bookshelf in his office, pulled down a framed photo from his first campaign, a town hall in Chillicothe, a packed room, someone holding a sign that said, JD fights for us. He set it on the desk next to the letter, not to remind himself who he was, but to remind himself who would lose if he gave in. He wouldn't sleep that night, but something inside him had awakened. The gravel cracked under the slow weight of his tires as JD pulled into the driveway of his childhood home, the one still standing in Middletown, chipped paint, sagging gutters, and the porch swing that had never been replaced. He didn't go inside. He just sat there, engine off, headlights casting faint beams against the overgrown hedges. The windows were dark. No one lived there anymore. His mom had long since moved out, but the shape of the place hadn't changed. Not really. It still looked like the kind of house people drove past without a second glance, like the kind of house where no one expected much to come out. He stared at it through the windshield for a long time. No music, no phone, just the low hum of streetlight buzz and the soft rattle of a loose belt in the engine as it cooled. This wasn't part of the schedule. His staff didn't know where he was, not even Usha. He'd driven here on instinct, not reason. The way an old soldier sometimes returns to a battlefield with no gun, just memory, and memory didn't disappoint. He closed his eyes, and it came fast. The nights with the fridge half empty and the lights half working, his mom's voice stretched thin with exhaustion, the way neighbors talked around them, never to them. The bus rides where he kept his head down because kids who wore the same shoes every day learned not to make eye contact. He remembered once, freshman year, walking home from school in a pair of hand-me-down boots that squeaked when he moved. A group of older boys had followed him half a block, mocking the sound with every step. He said nothing, just kept walking. But when he got home, he'd torn the boots off and kicked the wall so hard the plaster cracked. He was 13, and already tired of being laughed at. Now he was 39, and tired in a different way. But the feeling wasn't all that different. He opened his phone. No missed calls, no new messages. Just noise, notifications, headlines, words that didn't mean anything anymore. He opened the voice recorder, stared at the red button for a long time, then pressed it. They think they can outshout me, he said quietly, his voice raw with fatigue. They think if they make enough people believe a lie, the truth won't matter, that I'll disappear, that I'll flinch. He paused, staring through the windshield at the porch light that never worked. I came from nothing. I survived shame. I survived silence. I've already been erased once in my life, and I came back louder. His voice cracked, not with tears, but with steel hardening under heat. I won't let their lie be louder than the truth. He tapped the screen, saved the recording, didn't send it to anyone. It wasn't for them. It was for him. Outside, the wind picked up, a dry rustle through the trees. JD stepped out of the car and walked slowly to the porch. He sat down on the old swing that still creaked when it moved. He let it sway gently in the dark, alone. He didn't have a plan yet, no strategy, no press release, just the clarity that comes when everything else is stripped away. He was still standing, and that would have to be enough, until it wasn't. The voice memo stayed in JD's phone. He never listened to it again. He didn't need to, because by sunrise something had shifted, Not rage, not desperation, strategy. He made 3 calls that morning before the world was even awake. The first was to Dr. Lena Havel, a cybersecurity expert who had once briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee on metadata manipulation, former NSA, now private sector. She picked up on the second ring. "You told me once you could verify a signature in a sea of forgeries," JD said. "Can you still?" There was a pause. "Whose sea are we swimming in?" "China's," he answered, "with American lifeboats." The second call was to Malik Rios, a veteran investigative journalist and personal friend, someone who had left a national paper years ago because he got tired of editorial boards killing stories with too many uncomfortable names. JD had helped him land a podcast platform to keep reporting. "I've got a list," JD said. "I don't want exposure. I want confirmation." Malik didn't hesitate. "Send what you've got, and hold nothing back." The third call was to someone JD never named aloud, a former deputy legislative chief who knew how DC really moved, beneath the televised committees and polished podiums. He wasn't on payroll, he wasn't on paper, but he knew where bodies were buried. By noon, they had their first war room, not in JD's Senate office, not in a hotel, in a borrowed law office downtown, empty on weekends, quiet, forgettable. Lena set up a digital air gap system. Malik pulled out a stack of yellow legal pads, already filled with half-legible notes. The insider, who only ever called himself Roe, brought coffee, a burner phone, and a USB drive. They started from the beginning. David's transcript was the first stone. Lena verified the metadata on the original file. It hadn't just been created internally, it had been edited multiple times before deletion, likely scrubbed to remove incriminating tags. But she recovered enough to tie it to Eastbrook Strategies' internal server. "This wasn't a mistake," she said. "They expected no one would ever check this deep." Next, they followed the money. The offshore transfer that triggered the scandal? Malik tracked the account chain through 4 shell companies, eventually arriving at a shared registration address with an educational initiative tied to the Pacific Stability Foundation. "You ever notice," Malik muttered, "how the dirtiest money always funds something named after peace?" They mapped out a timeline. The Whisper campaign, the envelope at the monocle, the Kelton connection, and the earliest mentions of asset suppression. Rowe added names: quiet lobbyists, back-channel communications officers, former staffers from rival campaigns. All of it went into a single folder: digital, physical, redundant, dates, audio, documents, voice clips, payment logs. A file that didn't just accuse, it proved. JD didn't speak much during the process. He let them work. He observed, occasionally asked for clarification, but mostly he listened. At the end of the third night, Rose slid the finished binder across the table. Thick, labeled, bulletproof. "This," he said, "is what it takes to punch through their noise." JD opened the cover, read the first name on the first page. "And this," he replied, voice steady, "is how we take back the truth." He didn't smile. He didn't need to, because now he wasn't defending himself. He was preparing to make them answer. It started with a phone call JD hadn't expected and almost didn't take. His assistant stepped into the quiet war room late Monday afternoon, a phone in her hand and an unreadable expression on her face. "It's Senator Paige McClellan," she said. "She asked to speak directly. No staff. Private line." JD raised an eyebrow. McClellan was a Democrat from Minnesota, moderate, data-driven, famously cautious. She didn't do unplanned calls. She didn't extend hands across the aisle unless she'd already mapped the consequences. JD took the phone. "Senator," he said. "Vance." Her voice came through steady, deliberate. "I don't like your politics. Let's get that out of the way." "Noted. But I saw something today. A file. 3 pages. No headline. No source. Just facts." JD didn't respond. "If this is true," she continued, "it's not just an attack on you. It's an attack on all of us." JD leaned forward in his chair. "Then you believe me." "I don't need to believe you," she said. "I've seen the architecture. Lobbyists ghostwriting legislation, consultants running smear-ups. You're not the first. You're just the first to survive long enough to talk about it. Barely. She paused. You'll need more than evidence. You'll need oxygen. So I'm sending some. She hung up. Less than an hour later, a trusted political newsletter published a quiet, unsourced leak. Foreign influence operation targeted Senator Vance. Documents suggest broader pattern. No names, no accusations. Just the right words. Pattern, foreign-linked, coordinated. Words that made even skeptical staffers in rival offices lift their heads. Then came the radio segment on a centrist network. A former intelligence officer mentioned an alarming rise in weaponized misinformation tactics targeting lawmakers critical of Chinese economic policy. No one said JD's name. They didn't have to. The echo was starting, and unlike the noise of #VanceGate, this sound felt heavier, quieter, more deliberate. The kind of story that didn't trend, it burrowed. JD sat in his office, watching it unfold on 3 screens at once. One headline, one guest comment, one anonymous leak, and beneath it all, the subtle shift of public posture. For weeks, he had stood alone. Now heads were turning, not out of allegiance, but out of self-preservation. Rowe, the DC insider, entered with a grin and a black coffee. The fear's kicking in, he said. They're realizing if this could happen to you, it could happen to them. JD glanced toward the binder on his desk, still closed, still untouched since they'd finalized it. They're not protecting me, he said. They're protecting the system that lets them sleep at night. Same difference if it gets us traction, Rowe replied. JD turned back to the screen. Another story, another whisper, a new voice, same rhythm. A foreign-funded smear campaign, if confirmed, could raise constitutional concerns. Malik, the journalist, sent a text. Your storm's changing shape. It's not chaos anymore. It's pattern recognition. JD exhaled slowly. He hadn't won, not even close. But the walls that had closed in around him were starting to crack. Not because they believed him, but because they saw their own shadows in the floodlight he had turned on. He looked down at the voice recorder still in his coat pocket. The memo from the driveway. The promise to himself. He hadn't let their lie be louder than the truth. Now finally, other people were starting to hear it. The room was silent as JD stared at the folder. It sat at the center of the conference table, unremarkable in appearance. Just another binder in a city drowning in paperwork. But it held everything. The audio, the metadata trails, the transcripts, the shell company diagrams, the voices, the names. It was no longer just a defense. It was a weapon. Are we sure? JD asked, eyes on the file. Lena gave a single nod. Triple verified. Clean. Chain of custody established. Malik leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, but his expression serious. It won't just flip the story, it'll burn it down. JD looked across the table at the 3 people who'd helped him rebuild what they'd tried to erase. Then let's light the match. The drop happened just before midnight. No fanfare, no press conference, just 3 encrypted files sent to 3 investigative outlets JD trusted not because they liked him, but because they liked evidence. One was a Pulitzer-winning data journalism team. Another was a centrist watchdog group with a reputation for killing their own darlings. The third was a veteran reporter who'd covered Watergate and still insisted on printing physical documents before reading them. Each file came with one line. You asked for proof. This is what proof sounds like. By 6 a.m., it was everywhere. Senator Vance targeted in coordinated foreign disinformation. Plot leaked audio reveals strategy to frame Vance using fake offshore records. Evidence mounts. Pro-China lobby funded smear operation. The voice was unmistakable. Eric Kelton's clipped cadence, casually discussing how a well-timed leak can bury a senator deeper than a subpoena. The metadata matched to Eastbrook's secure servers. The money trail clear as crystal. JD didn't give interviews. He didn't need to. The headlines spoke for themselves. For weeks, the narrative had followed him like smoke. Whispers of guilt, questions of character, the slow erosion of credibility. But now overnight, it had flipped. The question was no longer, did JD take money? It was who tried to destroy him and why. On the Senate floor, colleagues who had avoided eye contact now paused near his desk. They didn't say much, just nods, quiet acknowledgments, the kind that didn't absolve, but recognized survival. Page McClellan released a joint statement. If foreign influence can silence one senator, it can silence the will of the American people. Let this be the moment we draw the line. Talk shows once hungry for scandal now ran segments titled, "How Close Did We Come to Getting It All Wrong?" JD watched from his office, not triumphant, but steady. The storm hadn't passed, but the winds had shifted, and now they were howling in the other direction. He walked to the window. The Capitol stood firm in the distance. No brighter than yesterday, but somehow different. Rowe entered without knocking. "We just got confirmation. DOJ is opening an inquiry. They want to talk to you. On record." JD nodded. "Let them." "And the press?" "Still no statement," JD said. "Let the truth do its job." He sat back down, opened his laptop, and scrolled through the first article. His photo appeared beneath the headline. Not staged, not smiling, just him mid-sentence, jaw firm, eyes forward. For once, he didn't look like a man under attack. He looked like a man still standing. The room was packed before JD arrived. Rows of reporters, shoulder to shoulder, camera crews angling for clean shots, boom mics hovering like vultures. The air in the press briefing hall at the Dirksen Senate office building was humid with heat, sweat, and expectation. They didn't know what exactly they were here for, but they knew it wasn't nothing. JD Vance hadn't spoken publicly since the leaks flipped the narrative. No one from his team had commented. There were no press releases, no tweets, no pundit appearances, just silence, until now. At exactly 10 a.m., JD stepped up to the podium. No backdrop of flags, no branding, just the seal of the U.S. Senate and the microphone. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He carried a single file folder in his hand and a small black device the size of a cassette player in the other. He looked out across the room. Familiar faces. Some friendly, most not. He spoke calmly. "A few weeks ago, you were told a story. That I took money I never saw. That I betrayed the people I represent. That I became what I always said I'd fight. And while I fought to correct that lie, there was a truth beneath it that none of you were meant to hear." He placed the recorder on the podium and pressed play. A burst of static, then a voice, crisp, confident, cold. "If Vance won't bend, we'll break him." A few heads turned. "He's not playing ball, so we frame him with the money. Singapore routing. Quick leak. Enough noise and he's neutralized." The words echoed across the room, crystal clear. No deniability, no spinning. The voice was unmistakable. JD didn't say the name. He didn't need to. The room fell completely silent, not politely quiet, frozen. A few journalists glanced sideways, gauging each other's reaction. One woman slowly lowered her pen. A veteran reporter near the back shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even the cable news correspondents, those trained to hold expressions like glass, blinked more than usual. JD let the silence stretch, let the weight of it sink in. Then he spoke again. "That voice belongs to a political strategist still consulting with active campaigns today. That recording was verified, time-stamped, and tied directly to a firm receiving foreign-backed lobbying funds. The goal wasn't to beat me, it was to erase me, and they almost did." He held up the folder in his hand. "And here are the documents you didn't ask for when you assumed the worst. The emails, the routing data, the contracts. I'll be leaving them on this table." He stepped away from the podium and placed the folder at the front of the stage. Then he looked up, his voice steady, but not cold. "I'm not here to gloat. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because the next time this happens, if you don't stop it, it won't be me. It'll be someone without a microphone." He let that sit for a beat longer. Someone who says the wrong thing or asks the right question and gets deleted before they are even heard. "I stood up because I could, but that's not the point. The point is that no one in this country should have to fight this hard just to prove they're telling the truth." He looked out at the crowd again. "You decide what you do with it, but now, you know." And with that, he stepped back from the podium, picked up the recorder, and walked off stage without another word. No Q&A, no statement, just the sound of shoes on linoleum. And behind him, a room full of people who had spent weeks trying to read his guilt, now struggling to understand his silence. The podium now stood empty, the room slowly thinning out. The press conference had ended, but no one really left with ease. Backstage, aides whispered in anxious tones. Some were already drafting reaction tweets. Others called their networks. But the country, watching live, was still stuck on that one clipped voice. If Vance won't bend, we'll break him. On Capitol Hill, things moved faster than JD expected, and slower than he hoped. By late afternoon, every major news outlet had either aired the clip or dissected it in primetime panels. But what he hadn't anticipated came from a name he'd never spoken kindly of. Senator Miriam Graves, a Democrat from Oregon, tweeted, "I've disagreed with JD Vance on nearly everything, but today I saw something we don't see enough in politics. A man telling the truth, knowing it could cost him everything. That's not partisanship, that's courage." It was retweeted 80,000 times in 3 hours. By nightfall, other members of Congress, both red and blue, followed, some cautiously, others bluntly. One senior Republican, previously silent during the scandal, went live on Fox. What Vance did wasn't just brave, it forced us to look at what we've become too comfortable ignoring. Still, JD didn't speak again that day. He left the building quietly. No interviews, no statements. He just went home, unfastened his tie, and sat in his living room with his wife. The TV was off. So were the lights. It was Usha who broke the quiet. "You know that clip? The one where you said, 'No one should have to fight this hard just to tell the truth'? That'll be played in civics classes for years." JD didn't smile, but he didn't doubt it either. The house phone rang. That phone rarely rang anymore. They almost didn't pick it up, but Usha did. She looked at the caller ID, then handed it to JD with a strange expression, somewhere between solemnity and awe. He answered. The voice on the other end was gravelly, familiar. "Senator Vance," the man said, "it's the guy who wrote you that letter. Vietnam, 1967. JD leaned back slowly, listening. "I told you that if it wasn't true, you better stand like hell." "Well, you stood, so now I will too." There was a pause. JD thought the man would hang up, but the veteran continued. "Some of us wore a uniform, others wear a microphone. Doesn't matter. When someone tries to buy your voice and you say no, that's what service looks like." JD tried to speak, but his throat tightened. The room, dim as it was, felt full now, not of people, but of presence. "Thank you," JD whispered. "No," the vet replied. "Thank you for reminding us what still matters." They hung up, and for a few moments JD just sat there, the dial tone still echoing faintly in his ears. A younger version of himself might have thought this was the end of the fight, that vindication meant victory, but this time he knew better. The fire wasn't over. It had simply changed shape, and outside, somewhere in the distance, the country was listening again. 2 weeks after the press conference, the chamber JD once entered under suspicion now stood in solemn attention as his name was called. The Protecting American Supply Act, tabled for months, dismissed as symbolic, and quietly strangled in committee, was suddenly alive and moving fast. What changed? Not just a clip, not just a quote, but a country that blinked. And the senators knew it. The roll call was swift. One by one, Republicans who had once ghosted him gave a nod. Democrats who had once dismissed him as bluster looked him in the eye. Some hesitated, but not enough to matter. The bill passed 86-14. When the final tally was announced, the gallery, once silent, broke into restrained applause. Not a standing ovation, not celebration, but something quieter and strangely louder. Respect. JD didn't look around for approval. He didn't smile. He simply folded his notes, stood, and walked down the steps of the Senate well, his footsteps steady, the echo deliberate. Outside, the press waited, microphones extended like drawn swords, but he didn't flinch. "Mr. Vance," one reporter called out, "how does it feel to be vindicated?" JD paused, then said plainly, "Truth doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just comes back. It was the kind of answer that didn't trend on Twitter, but it sank deep. And somewhere in Middle America, a farmer in Iowa nodded. A school teacher in Pennsylvania clipped that quote into her civics lesson. A teenager in Ohio wrote it on the back of his notebook. The aftershocks followed fast. Within 48 hours, 3 major lobbying firms were subpoenaed by the Oversight Committee. One announced it was suspending operations indefinitely. Another denied wrongdoing, but quietly removed 3 senior partners, including one linked to the Pacific Stability Foundation. The leaks kept coming. Emails, text chains, even video snippets from internal Zoom calls where strategy memos had been drawn like war maps. The public was no longer guessing. They were witnessing. JD didn't gloat. When asked if he felt vindictive, he answered, "I don't want revenge. I want resilience. That's harder." Usha watched him from the hallway later that night as he sat in his office looking at the framed copy of the bill. Signed now, ready for enactment. There was no champagne, just quiet, just wait. She stepped in, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said. JD looked up. He shook his head. "We did it, but I'm not sure we won." "Then what did we do?" she asked softly. He looked back at the bill. "We made it harder for them to try this again." And that somehow felt like enough, for now. As the camera crews packed up and the Capitol lights dimmed into night, one thing was certain. A man who once walked into that chamber doubted, outfunded, and framed had walked out with something stronger than a vote tally. A voice returned, and this time heard. There wasn't a press release, no staff announcement, not even a tweet. Just a quiet Friday morning in J.D. Vance's Senate office when a new frame appeared on the wall. It wasn't flashy, no gold trim, no dramatic spotlight, just clean walnut wood, glass pane, and beneath it, a single object, the envelope, the very one that started it all, still sealed, still intact, untouched since the night a stranger in a tailored suit slid it across a white linen table at the Monocle. The wax had worn slightly from age, the paper stiff from time, but it remained unopened, a symbol of something far larger than its weight. Below the envelope, carved into a strip of oak with deliberate care, were 8 words. They offered money. He offered a fight. Some who walked into the office that week glanced at it and didn't say much. Others stopped, looked closer, paused longer than they meant to. One Capitol Hill reporter, passing through for a brief interview, stared at it for a full minute. When JD noticed, the reporter finally said, almost awkwardly, "You kept it?" JD didn't miss a beat. "I didn't keep it. I remembered it." That distinction mattered, because the truth was, the envelope wasn't just a relic. It was a line in the sand. The moment before the chaos, before the hashtags, before the hearings and heartbreak. It was the moment he could have made it all easier, and didn't. His staff had noticed the shift too. Since the frame went up, the tone in the office was different. Calmer, quieter, more grounded. The aide who used to triple-check their firewalls now kept a physical journal again. The intern who joined during the worst of the scandal said she felt proud walking through those doors every morning. Even Usha, visiting after hours with coffee in hand, had paused in front of the wall. She didn't say anything, but she touched the frame lightly with her fingers, then leaned her head on JD's shoulder for a moment, not needing to explain. Sometimes the loudest statement didn't need a microphone. Sometimes it was the thing you didn't take. Later that month, a student-led political tour visited the office. One teenager pointed at the frame and asked, "Is that real?" JD smiled. "As real as everything that came after it." The group moved on, but the student lingered for just a second longer, then snapped a quiet photo. Not for social media, but for something more private. It would hang in her dorm room by the end of the week, and so the envelope stayed, framed, silent, weighty, not as a trophy, but as a truth. A reminder that legacy doesn't arrive in a headline. Sometimes it just hangs there, waiting until someone brave enough comes along to ask what it meant. The letter came in a plain, white envelope with smudged handwriting and no return address. It had been routed through the Capitol's standard mail screening, opened by an aide, and placed in JD's daily correspondence pile like dozens of others. But something about the crooked penmanship made him pause. He opened it slowly, this time not bracing for accusation or attack, but sensing something different. Inside was one sheet of lined notebook paper, torn unevenly from a spiral-bound pad. It read, "They said you were done, that you were lying, that they had proof. But I watched the press conference, and I saw your hands shake when you played the tape. You weren't acting. You were standing. I'm only 15, but I learned more from that moment than any civics class. Not everything has a price. Not everyone sells out. Thank you for proving that." Jalen, Cleveland, Ohio. JD didn't move for a while. The office bustled around him, phones ringing, emails buzzing, but his world had gone quiet. The weight of a $10 million envelope hadn't cracked him. The fury of a false scandal hadn't broken him. But this single sheet of paper, this nearly did. He folded the letter gently and walked it down the hall to where his son, 6 years old and curled up in the corner with a sketchbook, was waiting with Usha. JD sat beside him, placed the letter in his small hands. "Read this," he said softly, "when someone tries to buy you." His son looked up, confused at first, but then simply nodded, the kind of quiet understanding that didn't need a lecture. Usha didn't ask. She just watched. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the Capitol dome and the office slowly emptied, JD returned to his desk and tucked the letter into the drawer beside the original envelope. Two different pieces of paper, two moments years apart, but bound by the same quiet truth. One had tested him, the other reminded him why he never gave in. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its weight. JD stood in the corridor just outside the Senate chamber, his tie loosened, his posture relaxed for the first time in weeks. The chaos of reporters, hearings, and anonymous threats had given way to quiet nods in the hallway, to firm handshakes that no longer trembled with political calculation. That's when the journalist approached, young, polite, holding a small recorder, not the kind of person who pushed or provoked. She waited until his staff stepped ahead, giving them space. "Senator," she asked gently, "off the record, was it worth it?" JD looked at her, eyes a shade more tired than when all of this began, but steadier. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His voice came low and even. "If keeping your integrity costs everything," he said, "then everything was too cheap to keep." The journalist didn't respond at first. She lowered her recorder without hitting stop. There was nothing else to ask. JD gave a half smile, quiet, like a man who'd seen too much noise to ever be loud again, and turned toward the stairwell, not the elevator. Step by step, he disappeared into the afternoon. Back in his office, the framed envelope still hung on the wall. Below it, the oak plaque glinted faintly in the light. They offered money. He offered a fight. And beside it now, just added that morning, hung Jalen's letter. The words, written in crooked lines and blue ink, weren't under glass. They were open to air. Meant to fade eventually, but not forgotten. JD didn't need to speak again that day. He sat behind his desk, pulled out a blank note card, and scribbled one quiet sentence to himself. "Not every fight is public, but every choice is." He slid the card into the drawer, closed it, and exhaled. Not loudly, just enough. There's something quietly powerful about a man who chooses truth when the cost is everything. J.D. Vance didn't win by shouting louder or striking harder. He won by refusing to be bought, even when the world turned against him. In a time when integrity often feels negotiable, his silence in the face of wealth spoke louder than any speech. This wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder. Some lines once drawn define not just a moment, but a legacy. What stands out isn't the headlines or the reversal of fortune. It's the stillness in that final answer. If keeping your integrity costs everything, then everything was too cheap to keep. That line doesn't just echo in politics. It hits home in our own lives, our decisions, our compromises. So here's a question for you. Wherever you are, whatever you do, when the moment comes to choose between easy and right, what will you stand for? Let that question linger. It's not about politics. It's about who you become when no one's watching. If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.